Hello and welcome to a YouTube tutorial for Unity. Today I'm going to be looking at something that's pretty simple and straightforward. However, it will be particularly useful for a lot of different ideas and prototyping. We're going to be creating trigger boxes so that whenever our character moves into those trigger boxes, something happens. Now, what will that thing be? We'll start with something really basic like an object turning on and off. This will be really useful for prototyping gameplay where doors can open, things can change in your level. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got a little environment here. I've already got a first-person character controller set up for my player, so that's something you want to do. The same approach will apply to any other kind of controller though with a character that moves around. This could be a third-person game, a 2.5D game like the ones in the previous tutorials that I've got online. But at the moment, all we've got here for our gameplay is we've got our first-person character controller, so we can move around our environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a door. We could do this with Pro Builder, but I'm just going to make a door with Cube. Very simple, just to show you how you can do something very quick and easy, and you can expand upon this yourself. So I'm going to make my door like this. I'm going to stick it in between these two walls. And then we're going to have a version of the door that's open as well. We're going to duplicate our door object. In this case, it could contain multiple different objects within it, but this is a very simple example. Let's go ahead and rotate the door. If we can imagine that this is like the open version of the door, I'm going to rotate it and put it here. Maybe it needs to be slightly more open. All right, let's go like this. So I'm going to rename, just so it's clear for me in the hierarchy, I'm going to rename this cube our open door. And we're going to rename this one our closed door. So we want one of these objects to turn off. In this case, the closed door will turn off and the open door will turn on. And we can do this by hand by ticking this little tick box on our object itself. And that is essentially what we'll do in code. So when will we trigger something? We will trigger something by using a trigger box. In this case, we're going to make another cube, but this time it's not going to be a visual thing. It's not going to be a collider for stopping the player moving. It's going to instead be a trigger box. So how do we set that up? Well, once we've got our general area where we want the door to open when the character enters, this can be the area just in front of the door that I've made here with this box. We're going to go ahead and go to our box collider on this cube. We're going to turn that to is trigger true. That means now that we can move through this object without it colliding properly. It will instead trigger any scripts that are on it. And then we're also going to turn off the mesh renderer component here on the same cube. That just means that we no longer see the cube because it's going to be this invisible trigger box. I'm going to go ahead and add component, and we're going to make a new one. It's going to be called trigger script, let's say. Make that component and add it to the object. And then once this loads, we can see this trigger script, and we're going to go ahead and open that up in Visual Studio. So there's basically two parts to our script that we're going to have to set up. The first part is making sure that we have a method in our code which actually triggers whenever we enter it. And then the other part is what happens whenever that occurs. In this case, we want to turn an object on and off. To trigger the object, well, because it's connected to this box collider and it is trigger, that means that it will check, Unity will check any scripts for this special method, just like we've got a special method of start and update, which happen at very specific times. We've also got one called onTriggerEnter. OnTriggerEnter comes with it a particular argument, which is this collider, which will be a reference to the collider that has entered the trigger box. In this case, we only want the trigger to occur whenever the player enters, not when something else enters. For example, at the moment, it's technically inside the floor, but we don't want it to trigger when the floor enters the box, only when the player does. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to check a tag. We're going to check, does the tag, so we're going to make an if statement, if, and then we're going to check this collider other, and we're going to say dot tag. So is the tag equal to player, which means to say, does the object have this player tag? Well, that means we also have to make sure we set up the tag in Unity. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my player object. This is the one with the character controller, or it could have a collider on it, depending on how yours works. And we're going to go ahead and set our tag to player. This is one that's set up already. We could add a new tag with this. We've already got a player tag by default in Unity. So now this will only happen. The if whatever is inside this if statement will only happen whenever our player object enters the trigger. So what do we actually want to happen? Well, let's create two new game objects, two new game object variables that we can then reference our doors from. We want one door to turn on and one door to turn off. So game object, we're going to call one closed door. And then we're going to duplicate this code. So we've made another variable that is open door. We want one of these doors to turn on and one to turn off. So if we're opening the door, that means that we start with the closed door. So that means when we trigger this, we're going to set this set active. And set active, what that does is basically sets this little tick box on our object that we were doing by hand ourselves, right? We were turning on and off our closed door. So that means we're going to turn off. So we're going to set active false on our closed door, and we're going to do the same thing for our open door dot set active, but we want to set this one to true. That way we're turning off the closed door object and we're turning on the open door. We could invert these if we wanted to close a door that was open, etc. So we've got a very simple script. Let's see what happens whenever we move into the box. Nothing happens at the moment, and that's because we've got an error. So let's check out that error and see what's gone wrong. The unassigned reference exception tells us something about what we've done wrong. The variable closed door has not been assigned, and that's because anytime you see that unassigned reference exception, that usually means that your script needs to have a component selected for it to run in Unity, not in your script itself, but actually in Unity, looking at the component. For example, here, if I click on this trigger box, we can see that we have not set what the closed door is and what the open door is. So we need to drag those objects in. I'm going to drag the closed door object into where it says closed door. So now that variable has been assigned in Unity, and the same for open door. And while we're here, I'm going to turn off this open door to begin with, so that it only turns on whenever we open it in the script. Now let's have a look at what happens when we go over here. Now the door opens. It's actually just opens a little bit because of the way we set it up, but that will just depend on how open the door is. So we could make this better with animations. We could make this better with various different elements. One thing we could do is apply the same logic that we've got here for other things like lights. For example, we could create a light. I'm going to go ahead and create a light, a point light. Let's stick it in front of the door somewhere. Oh, it's like in the ground at the moment. There it is there. Let's bring it up. I'm going to put it on this door. And what I could do is for the door being closed, I could make it like a red light. And for it being open, I could make it a green light on the door. Because we're turning on and off these door objects in our script, any objects that are children rather, of those objects will also get turned off. So that means that all we need to do for our closed door is make our red light a child of that closed door object. And we're going to drag in the other light for the open door. That way, when we turn off the door, we also turn off and on the lights. Let's play this again, and we can see that when we open the door, it's now turned green. And we could, the light doesn't actually have to be near the door. We could just have a whole host of different objects that turn on and off from our script. All right, is there anything slightly more complex we can do? So we've got this script working. Let's make another script that is pretty similar. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new script. I'm going to duplicate this object, this trigger box over here. And this time I'm going to show you how to make something move. For example, you might want to move a platform, or you might want to move a door. In this case, our trigger script is we're going to remove that and make a new one, which could be called trigger script 2, or trigger script movement, let's call it. It's a little bit more descriptive. And this time, whenever we trigger our trigger script, let's open it up. So it's going to be pretty similar. So we're going to copy this code into our trigger script movement. You have to make sure we don't copy the name here, because the name of the class has to match up the name of the script. So we're just copying the methods and what's inside the class. In this case, we don't want to turn on and off an object, we want to move an object. And there's two things we want to happen here. We want to trigger the object so that it now is on, and then while it's activated, we'll move another object. Like let's, for example, say we have a platform. Let's make another cube. Let's drag it up. Oops, let's drag it up. Let's say that whenever we enter our trigger box, we want this cube to move slowly across the screen from left to right. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep track of whether or not our trigger has been activated with a bool. We're going to call it activated. And this time, instead of turning on and off our objects from our variables whenever we trigger it, we're just going to simply set activated to true. So this isn't actually going to do anything in itself, but now that we've set it to true, we can do something in our update method depending on whether or not it has currently been activated. So in our update method, that means we can every frame move. Oops, let's make sure we spell this right. That means that every update frame we can move the object from left to right, but we're only going to start doing that once activated is true. So let's go ahead and put in our if statement, if activated is equal to true. And now this code will only happen once we've activated it from triggering it. So what do we actually want to do? Well, we want to move our object from left to right. That means we need a reference to the object we're going to move. I'm going to use the transform for this because we're moving it. We're using the transform. So transform, this will be the object to move. And then we also want to know where we're moving the object to. We need a destination. So I'm going to use another transform for that, which will be the destination. All right. So to move an object, we're going to go ahead and object.move dot position, and we're going to set that position. The position is the set of vector3 variable. There's the vector3 variable, sorry, that determines where it is. For example, if we move this object, we can see that the x value of our position has changed. So we can just directly move an object, and we won't interact with physics or anything. But maybe we don't want it to interact with physics. We just want it to move. In our prototype, we just wanted to move a preset amount, right? We don't want it to bounce off things, etc. So in this case, we can just directly move the position. In this case, we're going to move the position equal to itself. No, hang on. We're going to set it to a position that is equal to this vector3 static method, which is move towards. And this move towards is going to be super helpful because we don't want it to just keep moving. We don't want it to keep, that's what I got confused about, which version I was going to use. And then I realized that we don't want the object to just keep moving, right? We don't want it to just keep moving right, and then disappear forever. We want it to only move towards something, and we want it to stop whenever it gets there. And we can use that with our move towards. In this case, the move towards takes a number of arguments. It takes 3 arguments. The current position, which is going to be just the current position it's in. So object.move dot position. Then the next argument, and you can see these arguments whenever you hover your cursor, whenever you select your cursor inside this this method, move towards, and then I'm deleting and then putting in the comma because then that allows us to see the arguments. In this case, the next thing we need is our target. Our target will be the destination dot position. And finally, the speed. That's going to be our classic time.delta time, so make sure that it's frame independent, multiplied by our speed. Now, speed doesn't exist. We're going to have to make sure that we make that as a new variable. And we'll make speed a float. All right, now we've made our code. However, we do need to set up some more stuff in Unity. For example, our speed at the moment will set to 0 by default. Let's make that 5. We don't want our object to move by the speed of 0. That would mean it wouldn't move at all. And then also we need to set up which object we're moving. This will be this cube here. So we're going to drag this cube in. This will be the object to move. And we also need to set a transform for where it will go. Now, in this case, I'm just going to create a new empty object. We're going to position it somewhere, and that will be where the cube moves to. Always rotate your camera around so that you can make sure that your object is in the right place, because sometimes it's not clear until you sort of rotate around and move your camera around, and then you can better see where the object position actually is. So then I'm going to drag this in. Oh, whoops, where's our cube with the trigger box? Here it is here. So we're going to drag in our game object for the destination. I'm going to save all this, and make sure to save your script as well, or else it won't update in Unity. Whenever I go into this trigger box, the object will now move from one position to the other. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff you could do, right? Whenever you have your object, your script activated, you could have other code operate here. You could have objects turning on and off. You could have animations trigger. But for now, for this tutorial, these are the two different examples that I've shown you. So go wild in your prototype, make doors open, make objects move around, so that whenever you're testing the game and you're testing your prototype level, as you're moving through it, you'll see somehow how the interactions will play out whenever the actual full game version of the prototype is made. Hopefully this YouTube video has been helpful, and if you have any questions, as always, then just shoot me an email and I will try to respond.